Hi everybody. In this video, I'm going to answer a question. And that question is, how much does speed affect your fuel economy on the interstate? Now, I'm sure a lot of you understand intuitively that the faster you go, the worse your fuel economy is. But by how much? And the faster you go, how easy is it to maintain your set cruise control speed? To find out, I went on a roughly 43-mile loop 3 times. Once at 60 miles an hour, once at 70, and once at 80. Now, I did a loop so that equalizes out elevation changes. If I'm going uphill one direction, I'm coming back down the next. And I did 43 miles because I thought that was kind of like the shortest distance where you got a general sense of what interstate fuel economy would be like, while still getting a taste of more city traffic driving from accelerating and decelerating, those types of things. So you'll hop on board with me for all 3 trips, and at the end, we'll sit down at my desk and I'll go over the calculations and what I learned. By the way, I'm doing this in a 2022 Lexus NX 350, and this is a brand new second generation SUV from Lexus. I will also talk a little bit about how it feels on the interstate while I'm doing the test. Anyway, let's get started. Hi everybody. Real quick, before the test actually begins, I wanted to quickly tell you how I got my data. For distance, I used the exact same route for all 3 trips, and I used Google Maps to measure it. It came to 44.5 miles. For time, I used the stopwatch on my iPhone, and I always made sure to start it right before I started rolling from my parking spot and stopping it the second I stopped again in the parking spot, always the same parking spot. For fuel economy, I did rely on the Lexus instrument cluster. It was the trip information. I always reset the trip information right before I left and recorded it right after I stopped. That's how I got the number. Now, it is entirely possible that that isn't purely accurate, but it is going to be a precise number. And the purpose of this test isn't to find out exactly what the Lexus NX fuel economy is, but to find out what the relative fuel economy is at different speeds on the highway. While we're on the subject, I also trusted the Lexus when it came to speed. So I just set what Lexus said was 60 miles an hour, 70, and 80. And that might also be off by a mile an hour or 2. Weather was really simple. I just went to weather.com and checked it there right before I left. Finally, for road conditions, the roads were totally dry, and it was on a Sunday between noon and 2:30, so traffic was pretty darn consistent as well. All right, now let's get to the test. 60 miles an hour, and we're there already. Okay, so I'm getting past a lot, and I will probably continue to get past a lot. Jeez. The beauty of 60 miles an hour is that you will very rarely need to worry about passing someone or being slowed down by someone going slower than you when you can't pass. You are the slow one. So what that means is that your set cruise speed will very rarely be interrupted, and that's good news for you, but hopefully traffic's not too heavy that you're slowing a bunch of other people down. Okay, progress report. I am currently averaging 32.1 miles per gallon, and I have to say that this Lexus NX, this second generation Lexus, is extremely comfortable on the interstate. It absorbs bumps really well. It's very quiet. The seats are very comfortable, and this massive 14-inch touchscreen gives me a lot of options. I've reached my turnaround point, so the first half of the 60 mile an hour run is coming to an end. Okay, officially back on the interstate, heading back towards I started, which means I'm more than halfway completed with my 60 mile an hour run. Yeah, no one's impeding my progress. Wrapping up the 60 mile an hour run on the interstate, still getting past a lot. Definitely looking forward to that part of it coming to a close. But generally speaking, it was all very pleasant, and I am achieving very good fuel economy, it must be said. Let me show you those final numbers right now. There you go. At 60 miles an hour, it was 21 degrees Fahrenheit. It took 47 minutes, 28.4 seconds to complete the trip. The cruise speed was set at 60 miles an hour, but my actual average speed was 56.2 miles an hour. And, drum roll, 33.2 miles per gallon. Pretty darn good for a luxury SUV. Okay, 70 miles an hour is set. I can hear some more wind noise for sure, but it is still very pleasant in here, and I have not been past 100 times already. We'll see how this affects fuel economy, but I can tell already that it'll be a lot easier to keep up with traffic, maintain traffic. I will not be as much of a burden to people around me, and I think I might actually have a semi-truck or two to pass. Also, I should note I am using the regular, not adaptive cruise control. It's very cool that the NX gives you that option to choose between the two, and I just prefer being able to manage distance myself. Okay, more than a quarter of a way through the trip at 70 miles an hour. I am still getting past quite a lot, but I'm getting past much more slowly. I'm definitely closer to the general flow of traffic than I was at 60 miles an hour, where I was basically a moving roadblock for everyone, including semi-trucks, and this is much more comfortable. It's currently showing 28.2 miles per gallon, and that is creeping up. Obviously, we start down because we start not moving in a parking lot and have to merge onto the interstate. But anyway, this is much more comfortable than 60 miles an hour. Much more comfortable. Okay, coming up on the halfway point, the turnaround point, and I made a pass. I passed a U-Haul truck. It was very exciting. Second half of the 70 mile an hour run has officially begun. Got as high as 28.9 miles per gallon, but having to accelerate from a stop and all that kind of stuff hurt me a little bit again, so we'll start working our way back up. All right, wrapping up 70 mile an hour run on the interstate. All day easy, frankly a bit more comfortable, and let me show you the results right now. Okay, once I had gotten to the 70 mile an hour test, temperature had risen to 23 degrees Fahrenheit, but as you can see, I was able to take a big chunk of time off the loop. It took 40 minutes, 56.6 seconds to complete. The cruise was set at 70 miles an hour, but my actual average speed was 65.2 miles an hour, and my fuel economy did take a bit of a hit. I averaged 29.1 miles per gallon, which is dead on for what Lexus says this NX can achieve on the interstate. And remember, this isn't pure interstate. There is the accelerating and decelerating from the on-ramps and off-ramps. Anyway, moving on. All right, getting up to speed, up to 80 miles an hour. And this will be the run that I think is most interesting, because I'm finally going to be going faster than some traffic and going to be having to make some passes, and that could be affecting my average speed a bit, but I'll talk about more of that in a little while. I want to make a couple quick points about the car. I am trying my best to accelerate the same way and decelerate the same way. Also, I am in the normal driving mode. I have been for all three runs, so I'm not making any changes there. Weather has warmed up slightly, but only by a couple of degrees. It is below freezing here in Michigan. That does make it just a little bit harder to get good fuel economy. So I imagine if you took this test and repeated it in a place like Arizona or California, you do slightly better just with the warmer climate. But now we're going 80 miles an hour. Now we're going to be with traffic or even ahead of some traffic, and let's see how it goes. Okay, more than a quarter of our way into the final run, the 80 mile an hour run, and as I expected, there are many more occasions where I'm being slowed down from my cruising speed. The faster you go, the more likely you're going to run into slower traffic. So I'm approaching the halfway point of my 80 mile an hour loop here, and I thought this would be a good time to let you know that I did a full review on this Lexus NX 350, and I really enjoyed this car. This is a second generation model from Lexus, and it really impressed me in a lot of ways. I have a link to it up there at the top. You can click on it there. I'll also put a link to it in the description, but this is a very interesting and indeed important car for Lexus to be putting out. Second generation Lexus NX. Okay, coming up on the halfway point of my 80 mile an hour loop run, and I want to make a point here that when I was going 60 miles an hour and 70 miles an hour, I was making a point to stay in the right lane and only be in the passing lane if I needed to pass, which was extremely rare. And I'm noticing now that I'm going 80 miles an hour that fewer people have that discipline than I wish. So far, we've achieved 24.3 miles per gallon. That is a noticeable drop, but we've got the second half to go. Let's see how that goes. All right, up to speed for the second half of my loop. And yes, there's definitely many more occasions of slower traffic getting in the way. And yet, as you can see right there, I'm also still getting past a fairly decent amount as well. Wrapping up my final loop, 80 miles an hour. Touch more stressful than 70 miles an hour, but quicker as well. Results coming right now. When I was going 80 miles an hour, the temperature had risen a little bit again to 24 degrees. As you can see, pretty darn consistent. And I was able to take even more time off, taking just 36 minutes, 33.1 seconds to complete the trip. Even though the set cruise speed was 80 miles an hour, my average speed was actually only 73 miles an hour. That was a pretty big drop from the 70 mile an hour run. And fuel economy took another big hit as well. I averaged 24.6 miles to the gallon. Definitely a big difference from 60 miles an hour, but a pretty darn big difference from 70 miles an hour as well. All right, everybody, you saw the fuel economy I managed for 60, 70, and 80 miles an hour, but I wanted to briefly show you a few more calculations I did as well. As you can see here, I calculated the difference between set cruising speed and actual speed, the difference in time from the different speeds, what percentage of time difference that was, and then the fuel economy difference as well. Finally, based on the numbers I calculated, how much fuel did I use on each trip? As you can see, I used a half a gallon more of fuel to go 80 miles an hour than I did to go 60 miles an hour in that 44-mile trip. And as a result, based on the cost of a gallon of fuel at the time, I spent $1.50 more than $1.50 more to go 80 miles an hour than I did to go 60. And if I were to take that trip for an entire tank of fuel, you could see that I could go nearly 500 miles at 60 miles an hour, but only 357 at 80 miles an hour. But I actually wanted to show you a few graphs to illustrate what I'm talking about a little bit more. Okay, check this out. This is a graphic representation of 60 miles an hour, 70 miles an hour, and 80. And as you can see, this is the set cruise speed versus the actual speed that I reached. And then up here, this green bar here is fuel economy. And here is the speeds, so you can see that data, and the fuel economy, that's this axis over here. So I wanted to show you this gap right here. See how we go from 60 to 70, the gap gets a little bigger, and then from 70 to 80, the gap gets bigger still. So that's showing you how our speed gets interrupted more often the faster we go. And this is our fuel economy at 60 miles an hour, our fuel economy at 80 miles an hour. This is more than a 25% drop in fuel economy from there. So from 60 to 80 miles an hour, we lost a lot of fuel economy. So that's just a different way of looking at that data. Finally, I took what I learned and extrapolated that out to what if you took a 1,000 mile road trip at 60, 70, and 80 miles an hour, using the same average speed you'd actually achieve, the same miles per gallon you actually achieve. What would that do? Well, it would cost you not much more than $100 to do 1,000 miles at 60 miles an hour, 116 almost to go 70, and almost 137 to go 80. And from here you see just under 18 hours to get the trip done at 60. You take 2.5 hours off of that if you go 70, 15.3, but you only take an additional 1.6 hours off of that if you go from 70 to 80. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this video interesting and informative. This is the first video of this kind that I've done, so I'd really appreciate some feedback of what was easy to understand and what was harder to understand, what you liked, what you didn't, that kind of thing. That would be really helpful for me. I'm Robin Warner, thank you for watching. And if you are still watching, I'd really appreciate it if you like this video and subscribe to my channel. Those things really do help me out quite a lot. Okay, goodbye. Let's see how this goes. Oh, it goes!